Last week we were looking at the Psalms, and one of the things we were talking about was how, we go on a road trip or something, and what we end up doing is we end up getting music to take with us. And you may have something for a long trip that you just want to listen to. And so we talked about that a little bit. I think it's still bouncing. Anyways, we talked about how we might pack some music and take certain music, and we just kind of asked the question, what would you take? And so we got some people that might take Dolly Parton, and some people might take some classical music to listen to. And Jennifer confirmed that Larry would take some ZZ Top. And Mike confirmed that Martha Carroll would take hip hop and rap. Is that right? I thought it was rap. It's not rap? Oh, got that wrong. Anyways, the thing is that we actually have that in the Bible as well, these songs of ascent. This was music they sang, songs they sang as they traveled to the festivals in Jerusalem. And so we looked at one of those, and it dealt with insecurity. Because when you're feeling insecure, you're going to sing a song about being secure, about praying for security. And so we see that kind of go on in that song. And one of the things we kind of landed with was that when you're feeling insecure, anchor yourself to the one who is secure. When you're feeling insecure, anchor yourself to the one who is secure. And so that's kind of how we left off yesterday, or last week. So anyways, this week I want to talk about something that shows up in common culture with music and all, that kind of has a parallel, and that's the cover song. Anybody recognize, what's a cover song? You recognize that term?
Like you're moving on up to the top, like starting over the snow.
No?
The beginning, like the beginning.
No, not exactly.
When another band covers an original.
Yeah, that's what I had in mind. Yeah, exactly. If you didn't hear, it's like when a band, or could be an individual artist, they cover or they do the same song as somebody else originally did. Somebody else might have wrote the song and sang it, 20, 30 years ago, but then this new band, this new artist comes along and they do the same song. But they do they're kind of their own version of it.
Remake.
Yeah, kind of like that. And so they do that, and those things become really popular too. I was looking at that. There's one by Whitney Houston called "I Will Always Love You," but that was originally by a country artist. Remember who that was? Yeah, it was Dolly Parton. So there was one by Patsy Cline, "Crazy," very popular song by her. But it was originally by who? Do you know? Yeah, right. Willie Nelson. He actually wrote it and sang it. And then there was another one. This surprised me. I didn't get this one, so I don't know if you will. Aretha Franklin, who's probably most known for this song called "Respect." R-E-S-P-E-C-T. But it was originally done by, do you know who? Actually done by a male artist, Otis Redding. And so these things, they became, wildly popular. I mean, like I said, I think Aretha Franklin's probably best known for that song. That wasn't even her original song. Well, we got something like that going on in the Bible. There's a psalm that shows up in the scripture twice. So you got the playlist, you got the hymn book, these 150 different songs, right? But one is almost duplicated completely within the book. It's so close that, they almost look like carbon copies. And so we have, before you get to singing, like say if you were in ancient Israel and you were singing through this collection of psalms, you would sing it and sing, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're repeating basically another one. And that's interesting, so that's what we're going to look at today, because our focus is the song we need to sing again and again. Out of all the songs there's got this one that's almost like a carbon copy. It's not exactly, but it's so close, it almost appears that way within the Psalms. So it's one that the ancient Israelites would be singing, and then all of a sudden, boom, it'd be right back to it. And so if you have your Bibles or can get to it some way, go to the book of Psalms. And we're going to look at the song we need to sing again and again. The song we need to sing again and again. And this one shows up in Psalm 14. And a very close match to that shows up in Psalm 53. But we're going to focus on Psalm 14. Psalm 14. And as I've said before, if you're not consistently reading through the Bible now, have something, a program or some kind of structure to what you're doing, read the book of Psalms through with us. That way it'll give you some context and some ideas about some of the things we discuss. Psalm 14. Psalm 14. Okay. So, it begins. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. That's an interesting song to sing, isn't it? We don't have any songs like that we sing from the radio, do we? It doesn't sound like anything we sing. It's just a topic we don't touch on. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Now, a couple things about that. Says in his heart. That's not an emotional response. When the Bible talks about the heart, it's talking about the center of your will. All right? It's talking about the center of your will. All right? So this is not an emotional response. This is not his feeling. This is how he has determined to act. This is his determined will. So when it talks about the heart, that's what it's getting at. The center of your will. So it says the fool says in his heart, that means he's determined this in his will, there is no God. Now, we read that in a modern sense, and we apply it this way. The fool says in his heart, there is no God, and he's an atheist. Now, that's a modern reading, that's a modern application. But the context in which it is written is different. Because this is written in a time of the ancient Near East, and there's no such thing as an atheist in the ancient Near East. That's a more modern term. That's a more modern way of looking at the world. There's no such thing as an atheist at this point in time in this history. Everybody had a belief that there is a God or gods. The point is, this fool is not that there is no God in existence, but what you can read it as, there is no God involved. There is no God involved. That means, yes, everybody knows there's a God or gods. That was, that's just how people thought of things. But they're not involved. They're not judging us. They don't care about us. All these sacrifices and all these rituals and all these prayers and all this other stuff, they don't have a thing to do with it. They're really concerned about God things. They're out wherever they're at. And if there's more than one God, well, then they're just kind of communing with those gods. The gods are hanging out with the goddesses, and they're doing godly things. But they don't care about us. We don't matter. There's nothing we do that affects them. So that's just the way it is. And so if you're an ancient Israelite and saying there is no God, you're saying this whole thing about Yahweh, this whole thing about the God of Israel, well, he's not involved. He's not involved with us. He's detached. And so that's a clearer way to read that. And it says, the fool says in his heart, okay, so he knows who these people are a little bit. There is no God involved. That's not a concern of ours. And they are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. They are corrupt. And their deeds are vile. Okay? So he's talking about two things here that he's cluing us in on. One is that they're corrupt. Now, what this is pointing to, this word here, is a Hebrew word. Kachah. Kachah. And this Hebrew word kachah, it basically means rancid. It means rotten to the core. It means spoiled. Anybody ever accidentally drink some spoiled milk? You didn't check the expiration date, and all of a sudden you found out real quick this ain't the real milk like you need to be drinking? Yeah, it's a bad experience. This is what this word means. Kachah. Actually, it's the Hebrew word. Actually, I spelled it wrong. If you're taking notes. So it means rancid to the core. It means spoiled. All right? And so there's something going on in an inward way. And this is talking about sin. This is talking about sin. And he's giving us a picture, a very enlightening one, about it. And there's something corrupt, something inwardly wrong about these fools who say there is no God. There's something inwardly wrong, and it leads to vile deeds. It leads to them doing things that are evil. It's an action that they're doing. Well, they're corrupt, and they do vile deeds. Now, we would look at that and go, doesn't surprise me a bit. That's not news. I could have told you that. That makes sense all day long. I don't even need a Bible verse to tell me that. You know, that people who deny God end up doing, because of their corruption, end up doing evil things. It's like the story of the guy from 100 years ago up in the mountains. And he said, when he was young, he said he didn't want anything to do with God or the Bible or church. And he became the worst guy around. They knew about him from all parts. He had such a bad reputation. I mean, everybody just avoided him. He was such a problem. Well, one day he died. And they got the casket together, and it was just his wife and kids. Nobody else wanted to show up to see him gone. And they're carrying the casket out to the grave where they had, and right when they get to the fence, the casket that the boys are carrying hits the fence post. And it jars the casket, and he wakes up. And he starts just cussing at everybody and yelling and screaming and telling everybody what to do and everything. And he's just mad as can be. He's mad as a hornet. And what had happened was he just fallen into a coma, and they thought he was dead. And so he got back to his old self. You know, he just ended up ruining the community and running down his family and his kids and everything like that. Just his wife was just distraught, and he was just as much of a mess as before. Well, a few months later, he went to sleep and didn't wake up again. So they got the casket together, they put him in it, the boys got the casket and were heading down to the graveyard. Right when they come to that fence, the mother says, "Mind the fence post." Because he was corrupt. They didn't want any more of him because of his vile deeds. And we know people like that. If you don't see it in the paper, you probably run up against it. This is not a surprise to you. The big surprise comes in verse 2. The Lord looks down from heaven on the sons of men to see if there are any who understand, any who seek God. Verse 3, all have turned aside. They have altogether become corrupt. Same word used here. There is no one who does good, not even one. Now all of a sudden we're in the same boat, because that's everybody. He's talked about those who have denied God, turned from the faith, rejected God. He's talked about them and talked about their corruption and how it's an inward thing and their sin and how it translates to these vile deeds. And then he went and put us in the same boat. I don't like that. You probably don't like that either. There's whole denominations of Christians who don't like that and who will teach differently. And they go through a lot of gymnastics, literally, with this stuff to try to avoid this fact. And they will say, well, this is just poetry, this is just music. I mean, look, it comes from the book of Psalms. But then they're going to get Romans 3 from Paul, and he quotes it as fact, literally. And y'all that were in my Discover the Old Testament or Discover the New Testament class, y'all may remember that. That if you come across something that's from poetry, and you're not sure if it's talking in an imaginative way or a literal way, see if it corresponds to something that's straightforward. Well, Paul brings it straightforward. Paul quotes it as fact. He says this is literally true in Romans 3. And so we're in the same boat. The same boat. Now, I'm going to give you a boat analogy. Because here's the problem we get when we struggle with this and how we look at it. There's two boats. There's the USS and the USS. And over here, we have the USS Maine. These are real boats. I'm not just making this up. And the USS McCain. Okay? Both of these are Navy ships built for war. And the USS Maine is going to represent this side. And the USS McCain is going to represent this side. Now, both of them went through a catastrophe where sailors died. Okay? The USS Maine, it blew up sitting in the harbor. It was at dock, and it just blew up. Something happened inwardly that destroyed it. Okay? There was something inward that destroyed it. The USS McCain was out at sea, not far from Singapore, and ran into an oil tanker. It was out, and its actions caused the catastrophe. Okay? The USS McCain was out and ran into an oil tanker. Now here's the thing. When we think about sin, and this is not just Christians, but it is some Christians. It's not just Christians, but it's kind of people at large. People in general. When they think about sin, they think about it like this. And they go, well, as long as somebody's actions aren't hurting anybody, it's not a sin. As long as it don't hurt anybody else, hey, it's fine. They can do what they want. It's their life. And so we say, well, this is really what sin is all about. It's just that. How many have heard that? As long as you don't hurt anybody else, you can do whatever you want. Right, that's how we think about it, at large. And even some Christians, unfortunately. But when it gives us this picture of sin and what we're dealing with, it also includes this. There's something going on inwardly that's going to blow up and destroy us. We are born into sin. So when God gives us a picture, He gives us a picture of who we are at our heart and who we live our lives out to be. But we only look at this. If we see somebody, hey, they're doing good things, they're a nice person, they ain't causing any trouble to us, oh, we think they're just good people. They're not sinful. And they don't see themselves as sinful either. But God points to us as an inward thing as well. There's something in us, inwardly. Our attitudes, our emotions, the way we think about things, that is corrupt. it's rancid. And it goes down to the core. So when God looks at us, this is the reality. And he's telling us about that in song. Now, since we're all together in this, both those who are the fool, who says there is no God, and us, this knowledge of sin is meant to humble us. The knowledge of sin, God revealing this to us, opening our eyes to this, telling us about this, is meant to humble us. The knowledge of sin is meant to humble us. Say that with me. The knowledge of sin is meant to humble us. One more time. The knowledge of sin is meant to humble us. Because when we realize we're in the same boat, we're on the same level ground, we're in the same place as those fools who reject God, well, it humbles us. And it humbles us towards each other. Because guess what? If I realize that dirty, rotten scoundrel that I work with, or that dirty, rotten scoundrel across the street, or that dirty, rotten scoundrel, whoever, if I realize that basically at the core, we're the same kind of person, that I was born into it the same way he was, or she was, well, you know what? When I'm humbled like that, I'm less likely to judge them harshly. When they do something wrong, and they hurt somebody, or they hurt me, or they say this thing that they shouldn't have said, and however it may happen, I'm less likely to judge them harshly because I realize we were in the same boat. And I could have been just as guilty of doing it as they are. When we're humbled by the reality of sin, we have a different perspective on each other. We don't judge them as harshly as we used to, because we're not better than them. We're on the same plane. We're on common ground. And not only that, not only do we not judge them harshly, but we can forgive them. You ever find out how hard it is to forgive somebody that you feel better than? If you feel better than somebody, or you go to church and they don't, you read your Bible and they don't, you're a Christian and they're not, how hard it is to forgive them when you think you're up here and they're down there, that you're better than them. How hard it is to forgive somebody. But God puts us on common ground. He said, y'all all started this mess the same way. You were corrupt at the core. And it led to leading your life that way. So it changes our perspective. The knowledge of sin is meant to humble us, to change the way we see and interact with each other. And it humbles us toward God. Because now we get a clear glimpse, maybe for the very first time, we get a really good look at how hard and how far he had to go to save us, to set us straight. Because this wasn't just dealing with, oh, I do the wrong things now and then. Oh, I hurt somebody's feelings by the things I say. Oh, I neglect the things I should be doing. Oh, sometimes I mess with people's lives. Sometimes I gossip. It's not just about these actions that he has to save us from. He has to go all the way to the core and save us from ourselves. He has to go all the way. That's why it says you need a new heart. That's why it says it requires a new birth. Because for God to change us like that and to save us, it's going to have to be both that he deals with. And so we have to be humbled. Now, the rest of this song the way it continues, it starts talking about the conflict between the wicked of the world and God's covenant people. But look how it ends. This is verse 7. This is how it wraps up. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion when the Lord restores the fortunes of his people. Let Jacob rejoice, Israel be glad. Did you get that? Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. Salvation coming out of Zion. Oh, that it would happen. You know, it's like Paul said, "Oh, wretched man that I am, who will save me from this body of death?" That's the Apostle Paul talking. "Oh, wretched man that I am, who would save me from this body of death?" He knew what had to happen for salvation. It had to be God dealing with both of these things. Because that's the reality. That we need salvation from Zion. We need the Messiah. And this is exactly what Christ did. He brought salvation to us. He brought salvation to us. He lived a sinless life. He died on a cross. He rose from the dead. He appeared to his people. He sent the Spirit for them. Salvation. He took care of it. I don't know where this lands with you, but I'm going to ask the question, do you know this salvation? Do you know the Messiah who saved you, not just from doing the bad things that mess up your life, but who changed you inwardly? Changed your attitudes, who touched your heart, gave you a new birth. Do you know that salvation? Do you really? Because there's two things here. Being humbled by the knowledge of sin gets us our path to salvation so that Christ can save us. But it's also the way forward for the Christian. Because we don't grow unless we're humbled. Unless we're always submitting to Christ. We don't grow. So the way we go forward into salvation is the way that we continue forward. With a humble spirit. That's why we need it so bad. Because that's the same thing God uses as we humble ourselves and realize what it was like. What God had to do within us to change things. That's the way forward. Because you see it. The corrupt do vile deeds. And the very next thing, all have turned aside. None do good. We're on the same boat. As the music plays today, that's what I want to put on your heart. Do you know this salvation that's offered? And if you do, you know how to go forward with it? It's got to happen with a humble heart. It's got to happen that way.